technology, a lot of the times, it's closing the gap between you and society being one. Like that's where we start vilifying and demonizing technology, because that is very dangerous. Why is it very dangerous? Because we already assume that we are isolated from it. It's because we've already created this narrative, the me kind of narrative of what I can accomplish and what I can do, not us as a society can do. And yet technology is creating that door open. But for the most part, most people are abusing it. Hello, unconventional founders, and welcome to The Founder's Truth, a conversation with Carlo, Mahfouz, and guests. Today is the second episode, and I'm excited to continue the conversation with Vjera Orbanic, AI and human behavior specialist and partner at Ethical Intelligence, as we dive into the art of disappearing and understanding technology's role in amplifying our collective presence and recognizing the power of language in shaping your reality.
I think one important thing that you mentioned, which I would like to shed light on, is this concept of disappearing the self,
Mm-hmm.
and that's also related to your presence. You being
Mm-hmm.
present in the current moment, and I wanted to ask you to just share a bit more about that.
Yes, I'm glad you picked up on it. It's a beautiful, I think, thing to not only witness another, but witness in yourself, and it's really hard because when I usually try to express it and like being so grounded in the now, being so present that you actually no longer recognize yourself, like you can no. There's an interesting thing that happens usually, whether you're talking or listening. There is almost as if there is a you which is sitting somewhere, and like you kind of or you feel like physically or spiritually or mentally that's always there, and you're almost afraid of letting them go. It comes out in thoughts. It comes up in like judgment on things that are happening. It comes out, and you have a figure of that you which is sitting there and making sure like, I'm gonna keep you safe, kind of like as if there is two people in you at the same time. It's a really interesting thing. And in some ways, what I try always to say, if you're truly present, you actually almost disappear from your awareness. Like almost you're not aware of yourself while you're honest in a certain, and to be fair, everyone has experienced this, even though they don't like it. You've experienced it in extreme situations, and that's where reality check kind of comes in through a lot of the times. Is something major happens, or someone you really care about faces something, etc. You just realize in those moments you're kind of not even there. Like you're not aware of the time, you're not aware of your present, you're just kind of in it all at once, as if you are all one. So you've experienced it before. It's not that you haven't. The problem is that it only happens in all those extreme situations. It's not the constant state, but it is the constant state. It's just that we're distracted from it, right? Again, by this, and it comes out really out of insecurities, out of being afraid of being vulnerable, out of the fragility of what that truth and presence requires. It's such a fragile thing that we are almost so scared of, just to let it be. And I think that's true presence. For those who got stuck in this being a little bit too philosophical, there is another dimension. You're sitting with a loved one. Like, right, do you feel the time passing? Do you feel even where you start and they end? Like, right, you usually even don't even notice that. You're doing your favorite sport, whatever, skiing, basketball, or whatever. Like, right, you're so into the game that you become either one of with the mountain or one with your team. Like you're dribbling and moving, and you're not calculating or seeing yourself even doing these things anymore. You just happen. Like that's it. Like it's not more complicated than that. And if anything, I will tell you, this is the best meditation. This is you meditating too, because most people are like, oh, meditating like the Wusa kind of thingy. I always say that no, it's not. It's actually, that is, being present and now. That is you disappearing, where time no longer kind of feels present in you, where the space kind of, where your thoughts, your emotions, your feeling just kind of become so here that even you're not even observing them. That's really, there's no distance between you and them.
Yeah. And how would you say, because as you said, like most of us experience that in life, and some people practice that more than others.
Hmm.
But how would you say that people could create a habit out of that? Of
Interesting.
like, how could we bring ourselves to be more in that space, rather than in this other, like, ego driven, where the I is very present?
Yeah, this is where it becomes, I think, really interesting and scares most people. Like what I'm just gonna say now is that you actually don't do it. Because if you are doing it, you're still participating. So in some ways, the practice and the preparation in you is coming to the point where you actually are not the one doing it, almost. Because if you are still the one who's, you think you are the one, getting into that state, if I want to put it, or like this flow, or kind of, if you're still into you haven't disappeared yet. Right? So you're still participating, and then that is already deterring from it. And I think that's where a lot of the times these things fail in meditation or others, right? Because you're still very present with them, while spending time with your partner or whatever, you don't feel like you don't feel that that's the same. So, yet that said, it's an important distinction I make in the beginning, is if you are doing it, then you're not there. What you can do is, though, start to get more comfortable what that feeling is, um, in a way of preparation. And that's why I do believe you start paying attention a little bit more when that happens, in a way. And and that usually is after the fact, because during it, if you're truly not in it, you're not analyzing, you're not participating in that. And I think that's an interesting thing. And the way at least when I describe it in the book, is really kind of going through all of these different phases. You need to lose the sense of space. The more you are attached to the space, and the space influences you, like your context always. And I'm not talking just physical space. I'm talking about, like, what's around you is always influencing you. The worst thing is to say that you're not influenced by it. I think that's one of the, that's one of the traps that you fall into in this, you are doing it. No, it's more recognizing all of these influences and just sitting with that, like allowing to recognize it and not trying to do more with it. Like it's really less of doing, it's like shedding and like kind of removing rather than adding, for the most part. And the same with time. you know you we measure almost everything in schedules, and, like, what's happening next week, and the assumptions, and what happened in the past, and my history and my credentials and all of that. But can you see as well, like, you are not, well, I say this because I mean, I retrospectively, again, like, I look at it and I see, I don't even know who I was 10 years ago. I don't even know who I was last week. Like,
Mm.
that person is no longer me, in the sense of, we really underestimate how much we are, and yet we get stuck by, oh, I'm an engineer, oh, I'm a coach, so this I can or I cannot do, oh, I am. But truly, really, like, that's how little we think of ourselves. That's how little society has made you think of yourself, as if your trajectory and credential defines who you are in every moment, and then you don't have the opportunity. And that relationship, again, is like a little bit of sitting with it and recognizing it. And that, what is really fascinating is when you start exposing it and recognizing it, and kind of almost letting it go. That's the process. That's really the it feels like very, as if you can touch it, but you can't really touch it. That's how it's gonna feel. And that's the same when we come to the more difficult one, which is the observer. I put it as the observer, which is you. Because there we're talking, you know, paying attention of how you articulate what you say, what don't you say, like, in a way, and why those choice of words or not words, like, kind of as well limit you as well. When we start talking about, your anchors and your thoughts, I think the thoughts are the most difficult. The relationship we have with our thoughts is so intimate that we are so afraid of losing it. Yet we don't control thoughts. We like to think we do, but we don't. They just come and go. And that association, that relationship, the more that we feel we are defined by it, the less we can be present.
Mm.
That's the best way I can describe it, is the more we feel that relationship is necessary for us to be present, the less actually we are. And that applies across the board.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I wanna now, with these things that we discussed, and I think, you know, what you just shared about presence and, being in the now, and having your ego disappear. um it's really interesting in terms of, the way we live digitally,
Yeah.
right? Which is quite ego driven in a way, right?
Hmm.
It's very much ego driven. And so I wanted to ask you, especially because then the third book and the third step also to this process goes into from I to us to then society and the world. And that includes technology, and it includes digital spaces. I wanted for you to also share a bit with me how you see that kind of reckoning of like the founder and the world and the digital world specifically.
I think it's a great segue, Vera, and thank you for the question. I think really it starts kind of bringing everything together. And if we build up on you and us and the collective, what was almost impossible before was how do you bring that on a society level, right? Because you were probably, restricted to your town and your village or where you live, like, right? You were restricted to who you talk to and etc. What we don't realize is with technology, that gap disappeared. No matter where you're sitting today, you can reach out the world. Imagine that, you know, no matter where you are sitting, you can talk to anyone. Social media, whether you like it for its pros or cons or whatever you want, right? You can access and knowledge, which is today kind of inside of AI to a certain extent. So it sounds positive and all of these things, but what people don't understand is technology to a lot of the times it's closing the gap between you and society being one. And that's very dangerous. Like that's where we start vilifying and demonizing technology because that is very dangerous. Why is it very dangerous? Because we already assume that we are isolated from it. Like it's very dangerous because we've already created this narrative that you said, it's like the me kind of narrative of what I can accomplish and what I can do, not us as a society can do. And yet technology is creating that door open. But for the most part, most people are either abusing it because they're not understanding actually what it's creating, right? And a lot of it, and then I think that's where we're gonna the conversation is gonna start changing, and I hope it changes. For if anything, that's what I'm advocating for is now between you, the distance between you and society is no longer far. I mean, let's talk tangibly. Your personal brand, whatever that is, however you think about who you are in the context, it's really who you are in the context of the bigger group and how people recognize you and all of that. That used to be very hard to do. Like imagine, I mean, 10, 20 years ago, I mean, if
Mm.
you were an author, you need to go to different events and like be present in different locations and you were locked in by the geography or your nationality or what, you're locked out. I mean, language is still a barrier to a certain extent, but is it? I mean, AI is translating on the fly, for God's sake, in any language almost fluently. So even those barriers are kind of dissolving very fast. So I think that aspect of the relationship of the founder and the society has not necessarily been talked about enough. We'd almost always talk about, the vilification of technology as if it's them versus us, especially once we talk about intelligence and like, this AI wave that's coming now. But the reality that we completely dismiss is that technology is closing the gap, and by closing the gap, you are being more one of society and your impact and what you can do more than any other time in history. And that's a beautiful thing. That's not like that's an opportunity for so many other entrepreneurs, like almost because uh, I don't know. And with it comes the diversification of the solutions and the things that we can do, not only the homogenization and the consolidation and like but I mean it's a difficult dialogue, it's a difficult conversation, I think today, especially because we're seeing a trend which is going to between globalization and like more nationalism or whatever these dimensions. I think it's a very difficult conversation. But I think it's a really important conversation to be had. And I think that's where we start, like, that's where we come full circle. It eventually kind of becomes you. Like society is you. Like, and because you can now feel it and reach it, you can see the reports, you can touch and, be exposed to everything. And I think that's where people get overwhelmed, because the inner work that should have happened, so there has not been an onboarding for you to get to the society level as well. We have just jumped, like, one day you didn't have access to anyone, you were sitting in your village, you don't talk to anyone, and the next day you can basically send a tweet and like the whole world will see it. Like, imagine there was never an onboarding to tell you like actually what is happening. It just told you, oh, now you are on Facebook or whatever, like now you can see the pictures of your friends and family, but no one told you about all the phases. And I think that's why it's very critical in this journey as well. We're starting with the self and then going to the teams and then going, and then you're going to start to see, holy cow, how cool is this that you and society now are almost one in what is possible.
I love that because I think that a lot of people, there is a lot of people who experience isolation and experience technology as something that isolates them. And then this provides also a different point of view and a different angle into actually you can be part of the collective
Yeah.
and you are the collective. So I think that's very beautiful, a very beautiful spin on that. A different entry point also with
Yeah.
technology. Now, I have one more question
Okay.
that's coming to mind, which is, and I'm not promising it to be the last because it might open another one.
Okay.
As we speak. But I wanted to go actually back um, to word, to language.
Mm.
And the reason for that is because even if you look like at all different spiritual teachings and schools of thoughts and so on, everything always starts with word.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted you to tell me a bit more about your starting point with language.
As in Christianity, they say, in the beginning there was the word, which is considered the word of God. I think it's a beautiful question, Vjera. I think it's really interesting. Is so I speak multiple languages, just by from where I am, and English, French, and Arabic, and because of that, I like the play. I think early on in my life, I've recognized the value, and even just yesterday, actually, and a good example. I haven't spoken French in like 20 years, and yesterday I met someone, and I started speaking French, and by the time I finished, I was like, holy cow! I remember, like, I didn't expect myself to remember all of these words that come through, and it's fascinating how it sits for you, but it opens a whole different world. But the point is, and I think just I'm setting a little bit so you understand, like, at least my background with languages. I think what's interesting is, uh, in a way, you learn language to speak. You don't learn language to communicate, and it's not the same thing. Like growing up, you learn the language to basically just allow you to name things around you and try to recognize the word around you and like just allow you to connect, but you don't learn language to actually connect, like to actually communicate. And I think there is a distinction there because, you know, I struggle with that a lot. When I first came to the US, there was a lot of culture nuances and things like that. I spoke proper British English, just to be clear. I didn't have the slang words and everything else. And it was very hard to connect. And yet I spoke English extremely well. I wrote it very well, but I actually couldn't communicate. Uh, and and I think there is an interesting is because what I've learned in languages was not to communicate. I actually learned just to speak. And I think
Mm,
this is a great starting point for that. Is as first recognize that any language today you master, I would say, or you don't know it for the purpose of communication and connection. You know it for the purpose of more, I need stuff and you need stuff. And like it's like a very transactional nature.
mhm,
And in some ways, the way I kind of was able to exit that mode of using language just for communication, I mean, just for speaking and communication, actually did not start with words. It started with accepting vulnerability and however it is, almost. And I'll say why in a second. And that happened to me using the arts. It was singing and music, which kind of allowed me to be who I am without like being afraid of it. So opening my mouth to sing rather than opening it to speak. Like, right. So I wasn't saying words. I was just like kind of belting out my voice. Granted I was not sounding that great, but who cares? But that level of vulnerability, once you start exposing yourself to it, actually that was what allows you to move from speaking to communicating. And that's where the word then comes as a next step. And this is where I would say for you to really master the word, you need to write it first. And I think that's where, when I went on the journey of becoming an author and like I wrote my first book, I think that became very clear. And the reason is we think a lot of the times too much about our thoughts and we sit too much in our heads and expect that to translate, that people will understand what that means. And the reality is it doesn't translate. So
Yeah.
when in the process of writing, you kind of clean it up. Like you kind of start understanding the weaknesses of it and like how it shapes and like because you're moving it from one medium, which is almost in your thoughts, to another medium. And that in that transition of mediums, you start to learn. And then only after that, so you come back to actually starting to communicate. So in a way, there is vulnerability starts first, like recognizing what that is. It's moving between forms. And I would say even further, write and then read it to yourself. You're gonna understand different things. So your thoughts will say one things. When you write it, you will say another thing. And then when you read what you wrote, you will listen to it and you'll understand another thing. And imagine just that cycle with only you in the picture. Imagine that cycle when you're talking to someone else. Like how much is lost almost. So that's fascinating. And then I think at the end, you move and you become able to communicate. And that's where the word becomes much more than a word. And I think that's really interesting. And that's the risk. And that's why vulnerability is a key component, because a word is never just a word. The word is a word of interpretation at the end of the day. And not recognizing that that's what it is, I think, even though it's something which is meant to define and clarify, but the word is still, something meant for interpretation. And the more we kind of have the vulnerability and the openness to go with that, the better we communicate and connect.
I got that. And I think, there is an aspect of communication and what I heard also in what you were sharing, which is, I think the most important aspect of communication is listening.
Yeah.
Not so much. And, as you said, you learn languages so you can speak and so that you can tell others what you need,
Yeah.
basically, right? Uh, um, but actually, there is like to truly communicate is to be able to listen,
Mm.
right? Um, and speak out of like being able to also recreate what another person is saying and then speaking
Hmm.
out of that like with that intention rather than anything else. So I think that the intentionality is also really important when it comes to words. And you were saying something before which was about the fact that our like the language is important because we create our reality with it, and
Hmm.
that's absolutely true. And I think this is also why all these different spiritual schools picked up on that, like
Yeah.
on the that's why we see that as a persistent kind of occurring in all different teachings.
Yeah.
Um Now, do not ask me the exact words, but I know that that's the case.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I wanted to, I wanted for us just to talk a bit about this creating reality also, like obviously the your first book is called Reality Check. So a reality as something that we create rather than something that is, right? Like we this is my obviously point of view, that we're constantly creating reality. We're like actively creating our reality. Reality is not just something that is out there. It's very much something that we um contribute contributes to in a way with our words. So I wanted for you to share a bit more about what you how you see it on your side when it comes to us creating reality with words.
I think this is really, really interesting, and I'm going to be extremely controversial here. Um, I think it's both. I think reality is what is, and we are creating reality. But here's how I'm going to explain it though. We are creating reality because it's our perception of what is, not
Yeah.
necessarily because we are actually creating it, almost.
Mm,
So I think this is really interesting because, and I think this is very hard to as well, like logically to, kind of piece it together. So I'm not going to try to lay it out logically, but I'm going to say in some ways, our recognition of reality is almost delayed. Like, even though it feels instant. So in that regard, it feels as if we are creating it because we are shaping it through our perception. And you can easily see that as one person sees one thing. And again, it's all from the lens of being observing something, because if you cannot observe it, then it technically doesn't exist, or you're not able to, visualize it or like kind of recognize it any other way. And a lot of the times, even one thing happening, multiple people observing it, they're gonna kind of project on themselves and perceive a reality which is almost their own for the most part. Does that mean that what is or what happened or what it is different, or is it the same? And I think that's where, I mean, we can play philosophically on a lot of these dimensions. My The way I like to think about it is what is, like, right? And we're creating it constantly because we're it's as if like you're shooting a video and that video keeps capturing the moment, in the sense that it's capturing those colors and everything else on the film. It's creating it, but not that the sense it's actually, influencing it. But at the same time, is it not influencing it because it's creating those colors? Because if you watch it in black and white, it's not the same as watching it in color. So is it not being influenced? It feels, even when saying that, the feeling is like a loss of control, while actually, and I think that's the scary, controversial part of it. It feels like such a loss of control in that statement, but there is a beauty in it to it as well, in the sense of kind of, I don't know, like I can always speak to both, because I feel I understand the fear and I understand how scary it is that we're not creating it. But at the same time, like, how liberating is that, no, we're not creating it, yeah, rather than perceiving it. And in that perception, we're creating it.
mm.
Like, the level of opportunity that creates for me is really interesting. And again, it's a perspective on it. Um,
Absolutely.
so, but I like to think about it in that kind of paradoxical nature, when those
Yeah.
two things hold true simultaneously. And why not? Because isn't the most important thing in some ways to see the breadth of possibility rather than to be confined to what actually it is? Like, that's the interesting thing about this is, yeah, I can get stuck on one and I'm like not creating reality, or I'm not shaping it. But in some ways, where I feel like the biggest aliveness or excitement, or where I feel like the biggest kind of breadth of opportunity or possibility that I cannot even imagine, I think I realize it in the other way. And that brings me to the point, which is even further controversial, is in the space of the paradox, the truth lies. In that in between, the opportunity lies.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that's true as well for you, and how you think you operate as a founder, with your teams and everything else. It's in the space in between. It's in
Yeah.
that gap which hold these paradoxes true at the same time. The opportunity lies, and I
Yeah.
don't think that shift happens easily. I think that's a very hard shift to happen. But when it happens, you almost cannot unsee it. It's really interesting. Uh, and I know I didn't answer your question exactly in that sense, but at least that's how I kind of see the world.
I think that's great because like I like, for example, I'm listening to you and I'm like, yeah, that like makes sense. It's not exactly how I see it. I see it a bit differently. Um and what I want to say is, like, I do think that there is like an objective thing that is happening, like, right, something is happening,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
as you said, like, what is. I also think that at the same time, our occurring of that, our perception of that, it's so constant, for a
Hmm.
human being, that it's almost, and I'm not gonna say for everyone. I'm generalizing, but I
Yeah, yeah.
think for most people, it becomes that's your occurring is the truth rather than like the other the kind of objective happenings.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, here I'm just providing my perspective. So
Please.
like, um, um, there is like I think a lot of times when we think of like, oh, like we have an occurring, we almost perceive this as like we're reading a situation and
Mm-hmm.
interpreting a situation. But I actually think that we're writing it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more like it's less passive of us, like perceiving it and then like observing it, and us almost like um reading something. It's like I feel like it's more active, like a writing, like we're almost writing the situation through our own lens. So I see it a bit more like active in that way.
No, no, no. I think that's really cool. Actually, I'm glad we're digging into it because I think this is really interesting, in the sense that it's really really how time plays tricks on us in both dimensions. One is passive, one is active, right? But in some ways, if you think about it, it's really interesting. Is if everything is happening now, there is no active and there is no passive.
Right.
Right, that's the interesting part, like,
Yeah.
because you can look at it from the passive sense and say, like, right, it's whatever is happening, and then from the active sense, almost like I am writing what it is. But
Yeah.
what is, which is like almost in its holiness right just now, cannot be neither active nor passive. It's just like, and I think that's the beauty of it, is we
Yeah.
are writing it and we are actually not at the same time. And it's going to blow some people's mind, but it's really interesting. Like right now in this instant as a whole, and if this instance, I want to like blow it up, if it's like just a singularity, and I want to blow it up into like a universe of its own, like there is no active and passive, because there is just is, like whatever you end up you're doing or happening, you're writing, whatever, like in both of its forms. But I think this is where as well the language becomes a bottleneck in this conversation, because
Mm,
the language is designed to actually either be in a passive sense or an active sense. So we cannot even speak about it. It's very difficult even to speak about it. This is a great example of how, if you're communicating some things, it's the words and the language we use dictate so much of how you can express it,
yeah.
because you are expressing in a active tone, I'm expressing in a passive tone, where neither the passive nor the active is probably, I mean, I'm saying it's not true,
Yeah.
right? And the truth cannot be expressed in the words, because the words automatically, I mean, it's a subject, object verb, like almost like there is someone who's doing something or no one is doing something, like, right? But if it's neither nor, we don't have a language for that.
Yeah. Which
Like
is very, very interesting.
it sounds like really strange, but there is no language to define things without this relationship, which is already inherently built into the language.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, it's a great point, and it's like, because on one hand we can say uh we're creating reality with words. On another hand, we could say we don't have the words to create reality, right? And
Exactly.
those are both true at the same time.
Exactly. And I think these things get me a lot excited, because I think it's a really cool thing to understand once you kind of almost a little bit accept that, which I think for some it's not going to happen after you listen to this. I can get into you. That's okay. Don't worry about it. But like, imagine once you do, how much things look different. Like, right? Like how many things, good or bad, have a completely different meaning.
Yeah.
And I think that's something worthy. It's like something really, really cool in a way.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. One thing I want to highlight, when we talk about ambiguity, it always feels like such a distant concept. But if you look a little bit more deeply, it's usually always the foundation for clarity. Because if everyone comes in clear, then there is no more clarity to be gained, if anything. And one of the things that I highly recommend from listening today is start writing, even if you can't write alone, in the sense you don't know where to start. Just put a few notes and let AI help you. It really doesn't matter who's doing the writing, as much as some of your thoughts are being distilled in something that you can read visually, and probably just read them aloud as well. You will process them very differently. So give it a try, and we'll see you in the next episode.